I was whisking batter in the kitchen when I heard the tires skid against the wet pavement. The sudden stop made my chest tighten. It was late afternoon, the kind of damp gray that makes you turn on lights even though it's not dark yet. I didn't expect anyone. Then came the knock. 3 times. Soft. Uneven. Like whoever was on the other side didn't want to be there. When I opened the door, my daughter fell into my arms. She didn't speak at first. Her body was soaked through jacket, clinging to her like a second skin hair plastered to her forehead. Her eyes looked past me, not at me. Hollow, like something had been scraped out of her. In one hand, she clutched a large manila envelope. I knew it before she said a word, divorce papers. Inside her bag later, I found the documents from the state confirming her company's closure. 2 endings in 1 week. I caught her before she hit the floor. She wasn't crying. That almost scared me more. I ruined everything. She whispered, barely audible. Everyone left when I needed them most. I pulled her in, helped her out of her jacket, but she wouldn't sit down. Wouldn't eat. Wouldn't meet my eyes. She went straight to the guest room. Her old room still with the faded poster above the bed, and locked the door behind her. For 2 hours, I tried everything. Tea, soup, just silence waiting outside the door. Rusty whined beside me, scratching lightly, trying to get in. "Valen," I asked once quietly. No answer. Not even movement. She hadn't come here to visit. She had come here to disappear. When I knocked again, she finally said, "Please stop." And I did. I stepped back. The door slammed so hard the frame shook. Rusty flinched and let out a soft bark, pawing at the door again, more urgently this time. I reached down to quiet him, but he didn't look away from the knob. He sensed it too. Something was deeply wrong. Days slipped by without rhythm. Valen barely moved from the spare room. When I passed the door, I sometimes heard her crying quietly. Other times, not at all. Mostly, it was silence. That thick, heavy kind that feels like waiting for something to crack. She slept through the daylight curtains, always drawn. I'd leave food outside her door, toast soup, scrambled eggs, but she rarely touched it. Sometimes I'd find the plate pushed back, barely disturbed. Sometimes not at all. I tried everything I could think of. Her favorite tea, photos from high school, her old sweater, the one she used to wear until it was more whole than fabric. I'd sit just outside her door in the evenings, talking to her like she could hear me through the wood. I didn't know if it helped. She never responded. Rusty never left her side. He'd curl up outside the door alert and tense, lifting his head at every sound. His ears twitched when she shifted. He whimpered when she cried. I didn't want to pry, but I couldn't sit in the dark with my fears. So I called her former co-founder. The voice on the other end was flat-clipped. The company had gone under, yes, but they'd seen it coming long before Valen had. They'd quietly made plans, lined up new jobs, moved on without telling her. By the time the paperwork reached her, the others were already out the door. That betrayal stung, but it wasn't the deepest. Her husband, ex-husband, had left her for someone else. Not recently. He'd been seeing the other woman for months before asking for the divorce. I didn't tell her what I'd learned. I just sat outside her room that night, my forehead resting against the doorframe, whispering her name through the silence. Later, I found a pile of unopened mail in her bag, overdue notices, legal letters, birthday cards she hadn't opened. Rusty scratched at the door again, restless. And I started to wonder if he knew something I didn't. The next 3 days blurred into one long stretch of worry. Valen answered none of my knocks, and the water glasses I left outside her door remained untouched. I could hear her shift occasionally on the creaking guest room mattress, but even those small signs grew less frequent. Rusty grew more restless by the hour. He wasn't just waiting outside her door anymore. He paced the hallway, whining under his breath, circling back again and again, as if he were trying to draw a map of danger. Only he understood. Every time I tried to coax him away, he pulled free and pressed himself against the door, listening. That third night, I tried to lie down for a few hours, but Rusty wouldn't let me sleep. Each time I drifted off, he nudged my shoulder with his nose or pawed at my arm until I sat up. He paced the length of my bedroom nails, tapping frantically on the wood floor. It wasn't like him. Rusty had always been calm, gentle, steady. This was something else: fear, urgency, warning. Just before dawn, he froze. His ears shot up and he let out a sharp, guttural sound I had never heard from him before. Then he bolted down the hallway, claws scraping, and threw himself against Valen's door, scratching so wildly I thought he'd break his paw. "Valen," I called, but the house swallowed my voice. Then I heard it, a dull thud, faint but unmistakable. My hands shook so badly I could barely grip the doorknob. When it didn't turn, I braced my shoulder against the wood and shoved. The frame gave way with a crack. She was on the floor. Her hair spilled across her cheek eyes, half open but unfocused. A bottle of pills lay beside her, several missing. Rusty was already at her side, nudging her chin, whining in short, panicked bursts. I dropped to my knees and lifted her head, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The minutes before the paramedics arrived felt endless, but once they rushed in, the room filled with clipped commands and swift movement. One of them glanced at me and said quietly, 10 minutes later it might have been different. Rusty refused to move until they loaded her into the ambulance, and I followed him out. Already knowing nothing about our lives would be the same when she came home. The emergency room was colder than I expected. Not the kind of cold you feel on your skin, but the kind that settles somewhere deeper. Nurses moved quickly around us. Voices clipped and efficient, asking me questions I answered without really hearing myself speak. Allergies, medications, history, stressors. I repeated the facts as if they belonged to someone else's child. Valen lay in the narrow hospital bed, an oxygen clip glowing faintly on her finger. Her face was drained of color, lips pale. She blinked slowly, struggling to stay awake, and every time her eyes drifted in my direction, she looked away just as quickly. Shame, exhaustion, confusion, I couldn't tell. Maybe all of it. A psychologist arrived mid-morning, a calm voice in a room filled with alarms and footsteps. She sat with me in a quiet corner and explained what Valen couldn't: the collapse of her company, the betrayal in her marriage, the financial wreckage she hadn't had the courage to face. How each piece had stacked on top of the others until there was no light left between them, no space to breathe. She didn't see a way forward, the psychologist said. People reach for what feels like silence when the noise becomes unbearable. I nodded, gripping Rusty's leash so tightly my knuckles went white. He sat obediently at my feet, but stared at Valen like he was willing her awake. Later, when the doctor told me she was stable, I felt relief and fear arrive in the same breath. Stability wasn't safety. It was only a pause, and the path ahead was thin. The first days after she goes home will be the hardest, he warned. She'll need careful watching. When I finally sat beside Valen's bed, she turned her head slightly. Her voice came out rough, barely a whisper. I didn't want to disappear. I just couldn't feel anything anymore. It was the most truthful thing she'd said in weeks. Rusty lifted his head onto the edge of her blanket. For a long moment, she stared at him. Then her hand moved slow, trembling, and rested gently between his ears. I knew then that bringing her home would require more than comfort. It would require vigilance, patience, and whatever strength I had left. I didn't let her go back to the guest room. The day we came home from the hospital, I cleared out the living room, folded up the love seat, moved the side table, laid down the old quilt on the long couch near the windows. I brought out the soft lamps from the storage closet and angled the light just enough to keep the space from feeling shadowed. No corners. No locked doors. She said nothing, just walked in slowly, sank down, and leaned her head against the cushion like it was too heavy to hold up. I cooked her the simplest meals I knew. Broth rice, poached eggs kept the noise low. The TV off the windows open for air when the rain let up. I canceled every order in the bakery notebook. There'd be no cakes this week. No deliveries. Just her. She didn't thank me. She didn't have to. I set quiet rules. Nothing strict. Just structure. Water every few hours. One walk to the kitchen before noon. One conversation in the evening, even if it was only one word. She followed them barely, like someone reciting lines without meaning. Rusty never left her side. He curled up against her legs when she lay down. When she flinched in her sleep, he nosed gently under her hand until her fingers settled. When she cried at night, quiet sobs she tried to hide, he pressed his weight over her feet like he was anchoring her in place. Sometimes I watched her from the hallway. She would sit on the couch, still as stone, staring at nothing. Then Rusty would lift his head, shift closer, nudge her arm, and she wouldn't move away. That was new. She hadn't spoken more than a sentence in days, but the way she let him stay, the way she touched his fur, absent-mindedly told me something was beginning to change, even if she didn't know it yet. The next morning, before I even got to the kitchen, I found her already sitting up, arms around her knees, eyes open. Rusty was beside her, awake too, watching her, waiting. The morning light had barely touched the windows when I saw him do it. Rusty patted over to Valen, still curled beneath the blanket on the couch, and gently dropped his leash into her lap. He didn't nudge or bark. He simply sat in front of her, still and patient, eyes fixed on hers, like he was asking something important. She blinked at the leash, then at him. Her fingers stayed motionless on the fabric for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "I can't." Rusty didn't move. She looked at me once, but I said nothing. I stayed by the kitchen doorway, hands resting on the counter. This wasn't mine to push. She looked back at him, then down at her hands. After what felt like forever, she threw the blanket off and sat up fully. Her legs wobbled when she stood. But she stood. Rusty rose with her and turned toward the doortail, wagging once like a signal. They made it to the porch that day. Just the porch. She sat on the top step, knees to her chest, breathing like the air was unfamiliar. The next morning, she stood before I said anything. Rusty waited at the door, leash already in his mouth. They made it to the sidewalk. 15 steps out. 15 steps back. Day by day, it grew. By the end of the week, they reached the park 2 blocks away. She didn't sit on the benches, just walked its edge while Rusty trotted ahead, turning every few yards to make sure she was still coming. Her posture changed. Slowly. Her shoulders didn't curl in so tightly. Her breaths didn't hitch as often. She began wearing shoes instead of slippers, tying her hair up, looking forward instead of just down. The world didn't come rushing back all at once, but it widened. By inches, not miles. And somehow, inch by inch was enough. One morning, I opened the door to call her in for tea, and she wasn't just walking. She was laughing just a little as Rusty circled her and barked once triumphant. She started asking for toast. Not much, just half a slice sometimes with butter. But it was the first time she'd asked for anything in weeks. I didn't make a sound when she did. I just brought the plate, cut the crust off like I used to when she was little, and set it down beside her on the patio table. She ate slowly, one bite at a time. Rusty lay beneath her chair, chin on her foot, like he was afraid she'd float away if he let go. In the afternoons, she took to sitting outside, even when the clouds hung low. Sometimes she said nothing at all. Sometimes she hummed soft, tuneless, distracted like she didn't even know she was doing it. Her hands didn't tremble as often. Her eyes stayed open longer. She didn't flinch when I walked into the room. Then one afternoon, I saw her reach across the table, open the drawer, and pull out the old brown notebook, the one she used for sketching plans, budgets, project ideas. It had been untouched since the startup collapsed. She held it like something fragile, flipped through a few pages, then uncapped a pen and scribbled something in the corner. Just a word. I didn't ask what it was. Later that day, while she and Rusty sat on the porch, her knees pulled close to her chest, she looked over at me and said softly, "I'm sorry, I scared you." It came so unexpectedly that I couldn't speak for a second. I crossed the porch, sat beside her, and gently brushed the hair away from her cheek. "You're here," I said. "That's what matters." She didn't smile, but her shoulders dropped slightly, like something inside her had finally unclenched. She wasn't healed. Not yet. But she was beginning to believe that maybe the world, our small piece of it at least, could hold her again. That evening, she stood in the kitchen, thumb pressed to her chin, and looked at the stack of unopened envelopes I hadn't touched. Without a word, she picked one up. The envelope sat untouched for weeks. I moved them once just to dust the table, and Valen asked me quietly not to, so I didn't. She grew stronger in other ways. She walked more, helped me chop vegetables in the kitchen, even began reading again dog-eared paperbacks I'd kept in a basket by the couch. But the stack of paperwork, the pieces of her unraveling, those remained where we left them. Until one night, just after dinner, she cleared the plates and said, "Can you sit with me for a while?" I followed her to the dining table where she placed the folders between us. She didn't look at me when she opened the first one, just began to read. It was her divorce paperwork. She flipped through each page slowly, her eyes moving over the signatures, the dates. Then she stopped. I saw her thumb press into the margin. "He filed the initial motion 3 months before, he told me," she murmured. He was already living with her. I didn't interrupt. I sat still, and Rusty moved under the table to lay his head gently against her leg. She opened the next folder, financial statements from her company. A spreadsheet marked with quiet exits. One name after another removing their shares, pulling out funds weeks before the collapse. They knew, she whispered. They were already gone. Tears welled up, but didn't fall right away. She stared down at the numbers, blinking hard, then finally let herself cry. Rusty shifted closer. She let one hand drop and rested it on his back. But she didn't fall apart this time. She didn't run, didn't scream, didn't vanish into silence. She cried, yes, but with her spine straight, her breathing steady. Like someone who understood the weight of loss and had decided to carry it anyway. She closed each folder with care, stacked them neatly, and looked at me. "I'm still here," she said, and the way she said it, I believed her. The days found their rhythm again, not rushed, not loud, just steady. Quiet coffee in the mornings, walks to the park with Rusty. Simple dinners where we didn't have to fill the silence with anything. Valen began working again, not much, just small freelance projects from the laptop we had dusted off together. I watched her set up a corner of the kitchen as a workspace, notebooks lined neatly, a mug of tea always within reach. Rusty made it his new post. He curled beneath the desk like he'd been assigned a job too. She reconnected with a mentor from her early startup days, someone who hadn't ghosted her when things fell apart. They spoke once a week, sometimes more. I could hear her voice rising slightly during those calls, the soft cadence of someone asking questions again. She made a repayment plan. Her idea. No one pushed her. She said she wanted to feel in control of her own life, even if it would take years. It wasn't about the money. It was about not flinching when she opened her bank app. I said nothing, just kept the kettle warm and the lights soft. One morning, while I folded laundry near the window, Valen looked up from her desk and asked, "What if I try again? Not a company. Just a small project to start with. Something manageable." I turned and saw her watching me, not with fear, but with something that looked a little like belief. Her voice wavered, but her eyes didn't. She scooped Rusty onto her lap. He gave a little grunt of satisfaction and settled in his head, resting across her arms. He kept me alive before I decided to live for myself, she said, quietly stroking his back. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She already knew I'd be here same as him. That evening, she brought out a clean notebook and wrote across the first page in blue ink. When I passed by, she smiled, not at me, but at the words she'd just written. And then she turned to a fresh page. It was a mild afternoon, the kind that let you forget time. I found her standing barefoot on the porch, arms folded loosely, watching Rusty wobble through the yard in a slow, lopsided circle. His back legs had grown stiff lately, and his tail swayed more gently now than it used to. But he still trotted with pride, like he was leading a parade only he could see. Valen's eyes followed him, soft and quiet. Her posture had changed. She didn't hunch inward anymore. She stood rooted, breathing deep, like her lungs had remembered how to fill without hurting. She reached up and touched the spot just below her collarbone where the tension used to live. The scar of what broke her hadn't disappeared, but she didn't flinch from it anymore. I stepped out beside her, my sweater trailing from my elbows, and stood in silence. The sky was clear, the kind of blue that used to make her cry during the worst days. Now she just looked at it. He stayed, she said suddenly, voice barely above a breath. I glanced at her. I thought everything was gone. My work, my marriage, myself. She blinked slowly. But you and Rusty? You stayed. I didn't reply. Instead, I reached out as Rusty came padding over tongue-lolling coat, grayer now, but still warm, when my hand rested between his ears. He sat between us, let out a deep, satisfied huff, then nudged his head against Valen's leg, until her hand lowered to meet mine. We didn't let go. The world hadn't changed. The damage hadn't vanished, but she had stitched together something real. Not the life she thought she wanted, but a life she could stand in, breathe in, stay in. She leaned her head against my shoulder, just lightly, the way she used to when she was small and tired after long days. Rusty rested across our feet, a quiet sentinel, still guarding what we almost lost.